Today, I want to talk about cognitive bias. Where do they show up on our cold calls and our discovery meetings and throughout our sales process? But more importantly, how can we overcome them? So let's do it. 5 cognitive biases and how to overcome them. In at number 1, it's confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is when we seek information that supports our own narrative. It's a bit of a weird one. So often when we hear information and we think, actually that doesn't support my own set of beliefs, we completely discard it. Our brains are often sifting through information looking for things that support our own narrative. So it's not based on facts or evidence or rationale, it's literally our brains looking for things that support our own set of beliefs. Quite a weird one, but it's a really, really common one, and it's something that you'll feel a lot in discovery calls and sales calls. So imagine that the person that's showing up to the meeting or the person that you're cold calling has had a life before they've spoke to you that's been enriched with experiences and the environment that they've grown up in and relationships that they've had, and all that has been put into a melting pot that's come out as a set of beliefs and a narrative. That story then gets carried into your discovery calls and your cold calls, and they have that with them in the call. So when you're using information that they don't believe in, or you're letting them know something about what you do and they've got a previous experience with perhaps a competitor of yours that was negative, chances are you're going to get tarred with that same brush. So how do we overcome it? Well, probably the best way of me showing you this is if I give you an example. So let's say someone's heard what you've said, deleted it and distorted it down and said, we've done something like this before and it didn't really work. One salesperson is going to say, okay, we're not going to be able to work together, see you later. They're going to hang up the phone and maybe give up there. Another salesperson is going to challenge that belief, and really that's what we're trying to do. In the same way a therapist would or a psychologist would, we're looking to challenge core beliefs. So how do we do that? Well, really the best way is to go deeper. So if someone says they've done something like this before and it didn't really work, look, sounds like I'm going to be barking at the wrong tree here, but when you use someone else and it didn't really work, what do you mean exactly? Might help me out in the future. Prospects then going to have to go deeper into the archives, into the mind, and start thinking about, well, what didn't work about it? What happened there? And then we're going to start going even deeper. So when you spoke to the supplier or the product or service, whoever it was, when you spoke to them about your issues, about why it wasn't working, what did they tell you? Again, we're going to have to go deeper, and they're going to have to lean on some rational understanding there. Did they ask the person who was providing the product or service to fix the problems that they were having, or did they also give up as well? All these things are going to be in place to clarify and challenge that set of beliefs and that bias, that confirmation bias. So don't give up at the first hurdle. Make sure you challenge confirmation bias and core beliefs. That's number 1, confirmation bias. Number 2, the most wonderful of all is the negative bias. So the human brain is wired to favour 60 to 80% of negative information that it hears, which is quite a mad stat when you hear about it. It means that actually human beings are all very negative. But really what it means, what the purpose of it is when we were tribal people living in caves and there'd be wild animals, it was safer for us to think that, is that a lion or is it a tree? Probably safer for me to think it's a tree. Probably safer for me to favour the negative option. So really that is a survival instinct, but carried through to today on your cold calls and your discovery calls, the negative bias comes in with the prospect of challenging information to keep them safe. So it's still there as the survival instinct. Now, the weirdest way around this, and a lot of people don't believe me at first when I first tell them this, is actually that you're the negative one in the conversation. If you're really negative, the other person tends to not be as negative. It's quite a weird conversation to have when I first explain this to people. But I'll give you an example. So let's say a prospect comes up with a objection. I don't think the rest of the team would get on board with this. We've been doing things a certain way for 20 years. Okay? So that's one example. Now let's imagine if the salesperson got there first. The prospects let them know their situation. They told them a bit about the problems that they've got. Okay, but you said you've been in business for 20 years. You've got a team. Why would you change anything? Why not just stay exactly as you are? That's the prospect, the salesperson bringing up the negative information for the prospect to handle. It has some quite amazing results. Often means that if you base conversations in that space, the prospect tends to qualify themselves in or qualify themselves out, but either are better options than you thinking you can persuade someone. So negative bias, use it in your favor. Number 3, recency bias. So recency bias is when we favor recent information over a full objective picture. So that might be that you've had a recent pain at work, you've had a recent headache at work, you've had a recent experience with a supplier or a provider, and it's impacting your current position, your current cognition towards whatever problem you're looking to solve. So how could that look? Well, let's say that you're pitching a software product and the person that you're speaking to on the phone's used a software product recently that didn't work out for them. Chances are they're going to base the whole conversation on that recent interaction with the product or service. And like with a lot of things, the answer to this, and the answer to combating the recency bias, is to challenge something. And when we challenge something, what we're really looking to do is not make someone feel stupid. We're looking to just double check and sense check, is that real information, when we lean on the rational part of the brain. So same as the confirmation bias, someone's used a system before, we're going to try and get the rational brain involved in the conversation. So how might we do that? Well, look, it sounds like you've used a piece of software like us before. I'm guessing the experience there was so bad, it's left such a bad taste in your mouth that you'd probably never look at using something else, even if it could solve some of these problems. So again, we're using point 2, a bit of the negative bias there, but we're also using a real rational line of questioning to get someone to challenge that recency. The reasonable response to that is, well, no, if something could fix the problems, then of course I'd be open-minded to it. And really that's their brain computing what you've said and delving deeper into the rational understanding. So that's the way that we combat recency bias. It's just with sense checking what we're hearing, going a little bit deeper. But number 3, recency bias. In at number 4, we've got loss aversion. So loss aversion's a really interesting one. You would think that life was about gains. How do I gain more? But actually people tend to, if they had a choice, would you rather lose something or gain the equal thing, they would tend to favor not losing something rather than gaining something. So what that means is if anything feels like a loss or like there's potential loss, it can often start quite a reactive process in someone's mind where they feel like there's danger or there's risk involved. So I'll say that again. So loss aversion is basically someone favoring not losing something rather than gaining something. So I know that sounds strange. It sounded strange when I first heard it, but the more you think about it, the more it makes sense. Again, all these biases and psychological principles are based on survival, so it makes complete sense. We're ancient cavemen that are walking around in suits and having business meetings, but we still carry the caveman with us. So how do we combat that? Well, the answer is honestly to be upfront and honest about the shortcomings or potential risk so that it's fully on the table. People tend to want to just talk about things and be heard. So it's very rare that we sell a product or service that's 100% foolproof, like it's going to 100% deliver. There's always going to be risk involved in things. But if we're upfront and honest about the risks that are going to happen, what happens if this doesn't work out, what happens if it takes a bit longer than expected, all that type of conversation will put that part of the prospect's mind at ease. So what I'm saying is, don't just have a conversation around the perfect rosy rainbow scenario, because you're setting people up to be disappointed. If there's a loss aversion component to your conversation, which most conversations in sales have, be the person who's bringing up the potential risks and shortcomings and handling them together so that there's no shocks along the road. It tends to do really well when you're trying to cultivate long-lasting relationships rather than smash and grab tactics. So yeah, number 4, loss aversion. And number 5, reactance. So reactance is a really, really interesting one. Reactance is that feeling that you get when you see the don't touch the grass sign, don't go in here, don't touch that, warning, keep out, don't eat this past midnight, all that sort of stuff. The feeling that we tend to have as human beings, the rebellious child tends to have within us all, is you want to do the complete opposite. And that carries on throughout life. So what it is it's a feeling of when I'm being persuaded and I become aware that someone's trying to persuade me, my mind literally wants to go the complete opposite direction. So really, based on that, trying to persuade someone to do something is completely counterintuitive, because our minds are literally wired to not want to do that. When someone tells us to do something or tells us all the features, advantages and benefits of something and starts to try and talk us into something, our minds tend to go the complete opposite direction. So how do we get past reactance? Well, we actually shouldn't be trying to persuade people, first and foremost. What we should be trying to do is set a pace and a standard of questions and a line of questioning that encourages the person on the other end of the phone or on the discovery call or in the meeting to persuade themselves. So that might look like, rather than features, advantages and benefits of here's a product that I'm going to try and shoehorn you into, instead of that it might say, well, if you were sat in my shoes and you could build a solution for you knowing that you've got these problems, how would you want it to look? So really we're leaning on the prospect persuading themselves, and we're not getting involved in the persuasion. We're just a vehicle to help them get to where they need to go. So look, that's 5 biases that exist in almost every sales interaction you're going to have, and 5 tips to help you overcome them. Hope that's been helpful. If it has, like and subscribe, share, all that good stuff, and let me know what else you want to see. Appreciate it.